Hi, so today I'll be speaking to you about the new maritime law that's come into effect earlier this year. It was long in gestation. I remember when I moved to the UAE 8 years ago, there was a lot of talk about bringing it in then. About 5 years ago, there was quite a lot of stakeholder involvement, so we were assisting some clients, some of the larger corporates and some of the larger state-owned entities who were asked to input into the drafting and the ideas that came into the new maritime law. The law was released in 2023, came into effect March 2024. It introduces some very significant changes in the basic maritime legal underpinning for the UAE maritime sector. Essentially, the idea behind it was to bring the UAE up to date with international best practice norms. The old law was from 1981, so you were looking at a good 40-year period where the UAE hadn't updated and improved its maritime laws. Just to caveat some of the things I'll say today, some of the implementing regulations still haven't been released this year, so there are a few bits in terms of the processes and systems as to how the new law will be implemented that we don't know yet. Here are the key changes. I won't list them out to you, they're all there, and we're going to go through each of them one by one, but as you can see, they're pretty broad-reaching in terms of the maritime law. So first, turning to vessel ownership, the old law was very restrictive. It only permitted Emirati nationals to own a vessel that was registered in the UAE. That's changed considerably, and now there are two different routes to ownership. The old route where a GCC national, well, there's three. The old route of an Emirati owning the shares in the ship-owning company still remains, but you still have these two new routes to ship ownership that are available in the UAE. The first is to establish a domicile or business that's based here in the UAE that owns the ship or manages the ship. So that's obviously a big push from the UAE government to try to get the shipping sector to locate more of a physical presence here in the UAE. The alternative is that the majority of the shares are held by an Emirati or a GCC national in the ship-owning company. So you can have potentially joint venture type entities where part of the shares are owned by an Emirati and part of the shares are owned by a non-Emirati, non-GCC national. In terms of vessel registration, this has been updated quite significantly. The Ministry of Energy now runs the ship registry requirements. The age limits for ship registration have gone through a lot more of a detailed update. So there's a 20-year cap for all vessels, and there's a 10-year cap for passenger vessels. That's quite different from the old system, which just focused on tankers, where it had a 10-year cap for that and didn't put an age restriction on any other type of vessel. You'll see this running throughout the new maritime law. There does appear to be a real attempt to try to put some more robust laws in place in terms of the vessel maintenance and ensuring the vessels that are registered in the UAE flag are of a certain quality and requirement. The procedure, we're still, as far as I know, waiting the more detailed implementing regulations. The old law had them built into the law itself, whilst the regulations themselves, whilst the new law envisages implementing regulations. There's also an interesting new under-building ship registry. So this is for new builds that are being built within the UAE, and this requires now that the shipbuilder themselves registers the shipbuilding contract with the ministry, and before they do so, they need to get approval of the new build ship building contract. So this is, again, I think, a tightening of the general requirements and in trying to ensure the quality of the shipping industry here in the UAE. A novel concept now is the registration of bareboat charters, so that's now permitted in the UAE ship registry. If you have a a vessel that's chartered under the UAE, a UAE flag vessel that's chartered with a bareboat charter party that contains an option to purchase at the end of it, that can now be registered with the ship registry so that it appears on the vessel's entry. And similarly, you're now permitted to allow a vessel that is UAE flagged to be registered in other countries' registers that note bareboat ownership, potential bareboat ownership requirements. It also appears under the new law that time charters could fall within the requirement if the time charter itself also contains some sort of sale option at the end of the time charter. Limitations of liability, this was probably more of a tidying up exercise. So the UAE had adopted the 1996 protocol on the limitation of liability for maritime claims a couple of years before the law came into force. The real difference was that the old law set out the limitation amounts in dirhams, and whilst the protocol had been adopted, the old law's limitation amounts in dirhams continued to apply. So the new law essentially adopts the special drawing rights approach that the protocol requires and puts those into law for the UAE. For the first time as well in the UAE, you can now establish a limitation fund. So if you're a ship owner and you've had a marine casualty here in the UAE, you can establish a limitation fund to try to limit your liability. That wasn't permitted before. There were certain things you could do in the local courts to try to do that, but now you have a proper system in place for the establishment of a limitation fund. The law doesn't specifically say whether or not you can use LOUs to set up that fund. But as we'll see in ship arrest, that is now permitted as security to put P&I Club LOUs in, which indicates that potentially the court would accept those in certain circumstances. Not yet to be tested, though. In terms of liens, the law sets out now in a lot of detail the liens against the vessel that certain priority creditors have, as in most legal systems. As is common in many countries, you have the crew, they're the number two priority creditor after the cost of a judicial sale. We've got an example there, debts included arising out of concluded by a ship agent on behalf of an operator or the captain. That ranks number 5. And there are certain time bars in terms of the specific priority claims that have been set out in the law. If you are a ship owner and you haven't been paid your freight or your hire, the law sets out that you do have a lien right. However, in keeping with the old law, it does require you, when you arrive at the UAE, to request that the emergency matters judge, who's in charge of emergency orders, to give you an order to permit you to discharge the cargo into a kind of bailment situation. So the law doesn't really provide for the standard position where a ship owner would arrive and would hold off from discharging by liening the cargo. However, we've seen a recent Court of Cassation judgment that says that this part of the new law isn't a mandatory provision. So if in your charter parties you do include a lien clause, that it looks to us now that the UAE courts are likely to respect that. Vessel arrest, when you have a claim against a vessel, so some of the priority claims we just discussed fall into this category, but there's actually now a very wide range of claims that the UAE recognizes as a maritime claim or a maritime debt, which will permit you to arrest a vessel and try to obtain security for your claim. This is broader than the priority claims, and you'll see there's a long list of them up there. They include some of the categories that not all jurisdictions allow you to arrest for, including insurance premiums. So the UAE has become a relatively arrest-friendly jurisdiction as a result of that. Alongside this, you also have some pretty broad arrest rights. The new law specifically recognizes sister ship arrest. So in circumstances where the debtor also owns a second ship, you're permitted to arrest that ship in the UAE under the new law. And I think perhaps even more interesting is that the chartered ships you're permitted to arrest if they're still under charter by the debtor, which is more unusual and a lot of jurisdictions don't have. Perhaps one of the biggest changes that got the most attention when the new law came out was that P&I club letters can now be accepted as are now permitted for the court to accept as security in circumstances where a vessel was arrested. This was always historically a big problem in the UAE because most of the local courts wouldn't accept a P&I club letter as security, and parties who had their ship owners who had their vessels arrested would have to stump up cash into the court or get a local bank to put up a bond. That is no longer a requirement, and the court should accept P&I club LOUs. Time bars for certain maritime claims have also been tweaked in the law. Slightly unusual. The old law was generally in accordance with international practice, so you had a 2-year time bar for collision claims that take place in UAE waters and a 2-year time bar for towage claims. Both of those time bars have been reduced to 1 year. So that's the reason for that. I'm not particularly certain, but it does seem an attempt to kind of limit the possibility of bringing claims in those areas. So bar that, broadly speaking, the new law has pretty much brought the UAE into compliance with a lot of international norms and requirements, and kind of brought the law up to date after 40 years of it not being particularly changed in any significant respect. A few bits still remain to be seen how they'll work out in practice, but overall I think it's been well received by the legal industry, and I think hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion today about whether or not the industry more broadly has noticed it and thinks there's anything about it worth discussing.